All right, so get this. We're going deep today into a world where, get this, philosophy and wrestling collide.
Hmm, interesting.
Yeah, we're going to explore this poem called Il Duello dell'Infinito e del Radicato, which means,
The Duel of the Infinite and the Rooted.
that's it. And believe me, this is not going to be like any poetry reading you've ever heard before.
Oh, I believe that.
This poem, it throws these two, I don't know if you'd call them heavyweights, but they're giants in the world of philosophy, Bertrand Russell
Yes.
and Antonio Gramsci, and it uses their like metaphorical wrestling match to explore some really big questions about how we understand the world and our place in it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting approach, isn't it? I mean, wrestling, philosophy, it's
But
not...
it's not the usual conversation.
No, not at all.
And that's really the beauty of this deep dive, I think, is that we're going to unpack how the poem uses symbolism and semiotics,
Which
the
is...
study of signs and symbols,
Okay.
to turn a wrestling match into like a battleground of ideas.
Mm.
So are you ready to rumble?
I'm fascinated to see how this all plays out.
Me too.
Because it is interesting how something as physical and kind of raw as wrestling can be used to explore these abstract concepts, you know?
Yeah,
And this poem, I think, does it really well.
it does.
It layers these philosophical ideas right into the actual match itself.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder, like, who knew that philosophy could have a smackdown?
Right, exactly.
So I guess before we get into the ringside action, let's
Yeah.
just sort of, quickly introduce our contenders here.
Okay.
So in this corner, we have Bertrand Russell.
Familiar name?
Yes, the logician mathematician.
A champion of reason.
That's right. He was all about reason, skepticism, constantly questioning, like never taking anything at face value.
And so in the poem, he represents kind of this abstract, open-ended approach to knowledge then.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
And then facing off against him, we've got Antonio Gramsci,
Okay.
the Marxist thinker, and he was really deeply concerned with the role of power and culture in society.
Of course, and spent years imprisoned by the fascist regime in Italy.
Yeah, so he's bringing like a very, very different perspective to the table.
A lived experience.
Yeah, one rooted in action, in material reality, and the struggle for social change. So imagine, right, these two titans of thought with their totally clashing worldviews
Yeah.
squaring off in a wrestling match.
Shade image.
But it's not just any old arena that the poem is describing.
No.
It paints this picture of this shadowy chamber
Oh, wow.
where it says, amber shadows spill through fissures of forgotten stone.
Wow, so we're not in a brightly lit stadium.
No, no.
It sounds like we're in a space full of mystery.
Yeah, it's almost like we're stepping into like an ancient myth or something.
Right, like a place where ideas themselves can wrestle with the shadows.
Yes, and the poem describes it as a circling hymn, which kind of suggests this ritualistic quality to the match.
I see. So it's like tapping into something primal and timeless.
Yes,
I
exactly.
like it.
And then the way the poem describes their movements is just so evocative.
Oh, I bet.
So Russell,
Okay.
he's described as like pale and weightless, almost floating.
Really?
Yeah, it's as though borne by the wind of half-formed thoughts.
Wow, I can almost picture him, drifting around the ring.
Yes.
Kind of detached from the physical world.
Yeah, lost in his world of ideas.
Yeah.
Right?
Interesting.
Then you have Gramsci, who is described as compact and wrought from sinew and stone. So a stark contrast,
Absolutely, yeah.
to Russell's ethereal presence.
And his movements.
His movements are urgent, angular, like he's constantly pushing against something.
Yeah, I get that sense.
You get the sense that, like, with every move, every turn of his body might wrench free some shackle unseen but felt.
Wow, that's powerful imagery.
It is. It's really powerful.
And it really underscores his focus on those material conditions, right?
Exactly.
On those tangible constraints that bind us.
Yeah.
And the struggle to break free from them.
So even in their physicality, you see these contrasting approaches to life and knowledge reflected.
Fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's really just setting the stage for this clash
Right.
of not just bodies, but of philosophies.
Yes, and I think what's interesting is that the poem doesn't just tell us what these philosophies are, it embodies them in the language.
Right.
The imagery, the movements of the wrestlers.
Yes.
And this is where semiotics comes in, right?
Right.
This understanding of how these symbols work, how they create meaning, it allows us to decode the deeper layers of the poem's message.
It does. It's like the poem is speaking in the secret language of symbols.
A visual code.
Yes. And semiotics gives us the key to unlock it.
I like that.
So how do we start to decipher this symbolic wrestling match?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, that's what we're going to grapple with next time.
Looking forward to it.
Me too.
All right.
All right, so we've got Russell and Gramsci, right? These philosophical titans kind of circling each other in this shadowy chamber we talked about.
Right.
But before they actually lock up.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about semiotics.
Okay.
Which is
The study of signs and symbols.
That's it. And I know it sounds a little academic, but just bear with me here.
Sure.
Because it's actually a cool way to understand how this poem is working on a deeper level.
I agree.
Think about it. Like, we encounter symbols all the time in our everyday lives.
Yeah, we do. All the time.
I mean, you think about logos, emojis, traffic signs, all that stuff.
Yep. They all convey meaning beyond just like their literal form, right?
Exactly, yeah. And this poem is doing something very similar.
It is.
It's using like a language of symbols to explore these really complex philosophical ideas.
And it does it, I think, in a way that's surprisingly engaging.
It does. It really does.
Yeah.
It's like the poem is speaking in this visual code, you know?
Hmm.
And semiotics gives us the key to kind of crack that code.
It's like a secret language.
It is. So how does this all play out with Russell and Gramsci,
Right.
in the ring?
Well, one thing the poem does consistently is that it uses this really contrasting imagery to represent them.
Okay.
And it's not just like their physical appearance. It goes beyond that. It's in their movements, the things that they're associated with.
Yeah.
Even like the sounds that they make.
Oh, wow.
For example, so Russell, he's often described in connection with things like wind,
Okay.
whispers,
Yeah.
questions, things that are, kind of intangible, elusive,
Yeah.
always in motion.
Always in motion, yeah.
Like he can't be pinned down.
Yeah, and it's like he embodies this concept of infinity
Right.
that the poem's title mentions.
Which makes sense, right? Because his focus on abstract thought, on constantly questioning,
Yeah.
exploring, without necessarily seeking like definitive answers, it aligns with this idea of,
Yeah.
infinite possibilities,
Infinite possibilities, yeah.
boundless exploration.
And then you got Gramsci.
Who represents rootedness?
Yes, rootedness, and he's described, I love this, as like wrought from sinew and stone,
Ooh, yeah, I like that.
with a voice like a cascade of iron filings.
Okay, so very different from Russell.
Oh yeah, there's a sense of salinity.
Grounded.
Yeah, connection to the material world.
Yeah, it's like it's almost literally made of the earth.
Yes, and then his movements are likened to the ticking of a clock.
Ooh, that's interesting.
And it suggests this sense of like urgency, purpose, a drive towards concrete action.
Because, well, remember, he was a revolutionary thinker, right?
He was,
deeply concerned with actually changing the real conditions of the world,
yeah,
not just contemplating them.
right.
So this imagery of rootedness, of being grounded in this material reality,
Yeah,
of struggle and resistance, it really captures his philosophical stance.
perfectly. And it's interesting, right, because the poem doesn't shy away from that tension between
Right.
these two ways of being in the world, you know? It's not saying that one is better than the other.
It's just highlighting the dynamic interplay between the two.
Exactly. It's like, two sides of the same coin.
You need both, right?
You need both. You need the boundless exploration of infinity.
The willingness to question and think critically.
Yes, but you also need that grounded action of rootedness.
The drive to translate those ideas into, tangible change.
Right, and this tension really comes to life in the dialogue.
Oh, yeah.
That unfolds during the match. They're not just like throwing punches, they're throwing ideas at each other.
Right, like a verbal sparring match.
It is a verbal sparring match.
Okay.
So there's this one moment, right, where Russell
Yeah.
poses this very abstract question.
Let's hear it.
He says, "Is not the fight itself proof of freedom? What prisoner dreams of chains?"
Classic Russell, challenging those assumptions.
Yes, pushing the boundaries of thought, but Gramsci's response is pure action.
Okay, how so?
The poem says he answers the silence, but it's a silence that feels like a city in revolt.
Wow, I love that image.
It's so powerful, and it speaks volumes, I think, about his belief in the power of collective action
Yeah.
to break free from oppression, you know?
You can almost feel the rumble of the hobblestones being torn from the streets.
Yes, you can, and it's such a brilliant contrast, you know?
It is, because Russell's all about exploring those philosophical implications of freedom,
Yeah.
while Gramsci's embodying that freedom
Yes.
in his very being, in his refusal to be silenced.
And then it keeps going, this back and forth.
It does.
Yeah, so at one point, Russell, he questions the value of knowledge for its own sake.
Okay.
And he asks, does not the value of thought lie in its infinity?
So he's suggesting that the pursuit of knowledge, the constant questioning, the exploration,
Yeah.
it's an end in itself.
Yes.
Regardless of any practical application.
Exactly. But Gramsci comes back with a very different perspective, and he says, to question is to weaken. To act is to carve the future from the stone of now.
Oh, so for him, knowledge is a tool
Yes.
for action, for shaping the world,
Yeah.
according to a vision of, a more just and equitable society.
And even the way their wrestling moves are described, right, reinforces these contrasting philosophies.
Really?
So remember how we talked about how Russell kind of slips free through like absence of resistance?
Yeah, I remember that.
Well, that fluidity really reflects his approach to knowledge. He's not trying to impose his will, but rather kind of adapt and flow with those,
The ever-changing currents of thought.
Exactly. Whereas Gramsci's grip tightens.
Okay.
And it vibrates like a struck chord.
Huh.
And it represents like his unwavering commitment.
Yeah.
And the force of his convictions.
Right, like his mind is made up.
Yeah, it's almost as if like their physical struggle is mirroring this clash of their ideologies.
It's fascinating, isn't it, that you can see that playing out?
It is. It is. And here's the thing, right?
Okay.
Even though they're engaged in this intense fight,
Right.
the poem never declares a clear winner.
It doesn't.
It doesn't. No, instead it ends with them locked in this like eternal embrace.
Oh, wow.
Almost suggesting that this tension between these two forces, it's ongoing, maybe even necessary.
Yeah, so what are we supposed to make of this unresolved ending then? I mean, are we just left with a philosophical stalemate?
Well, I don't think so. I think the poem is telling us that the real fight isn't about like one side defeating the other.
Okay.
But it's about this ongoing dialogue between thought and action, between the infinite and the rooted.
Yeah. And that's a dynamic process, constantly evolving, right?
It is.
Pushing us to find new ways to navigate these fundamental tensions,
Yeah, in our lives and in the world around us.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's not about picking a side.
No.
But it's about understanding that interplay between these two forces and how they shape our understanding of the world.
I see.
But how does all of this tie back to semiotics?
Well, remember that in semiotics, meaning is never fixed. It's never absolute. It's constantly being created and recreated through the interaction between signs, objects, and interpreters.
Right.
Just like the struggle between Russell and Gramsci, meaning is dynamic and evolving.
So the poem itself is it's like a living semiotic system.
It is, yeah.
Where these ideas are constantly wrestling with each other, generating new meanings and interpretations.
Exactly. And that's what makes this poem, and I think this deep dive, so thought-provoking.
It is.
It challenges us to look beyond the surface and see the deeper struggle between abstract thought and concrete action that's playing out in every aspect of our lives.
It really is. I'm starting to see now how even a wrestling match can be like a vehicle for exploring these complex ideas,
That's true.
And it's making me think about how these forces of infinity and rootedness, how they show up in my own life.
And that's a great point, and that's something that we can explore further, because what's fascinating here is that the poem, it doesn't offer any easy answers.
No, it doesn't.
It leaves us with questions.
Yeah.
It leaves us with this lingering sense of tension that we have to kind of grapple with ourselves. And that's what we'll delve into in the final part of our deep dive.
I'm ready.
Me too.
Okay, so we've really unpacked all this symbolism and seen how this poem turns a wrestling match into like this metaphor, right?
Right.
For the struggle between infinity and rootedness, these two forces that really shape how we think and how we act in the world.
They do.
But the poem, it doesn't really tell us,
Doesn't tell us who wins.
It doesn't. Which side wins? Well, it kind of leaves us wondering, okay, what's the takeaway here? Is it just a draw?
I don't think it's about declaring a winner. I think what's really brilliant about this poem is that it leaves that ending open.
Okay.
Right? And that mirrors this ongoing tension between these two ways of being.
Yeah.
You see both infinity and rootedness. They have their own strengths and limitations.
Okay.
So think about it like this.
Okay.
You need that boundless curiosity of infinity to question assumptions, to explore new ideas, to dream big.
To dream big, yeah.
But without that grounded practicality of rootedness, those ideas, they might just stay abstract.
Right.
They never translate into real-world change.
It's like that saying, ideas without action are just dreams.
Exactly.
But then on the flip side,
you can't just act without thinking.
Right.
Action without that thoughtful consideration can lead to blind alleys.
Or even unintended consequences.
Exactly.
So it seems like what the poem is suggesting is we need both.
We need both, yeah.
We need that expansive thinking of Russell. and the grounded action of Gramsci.
Yeah, and the poem isn't advocating for one over the other. It's highlighting their interconnectedness.
Okay.
You know, it's like a dance,
Yeah.
this constant push and pull between these two forces that ultimately drives progress.
It does.
And think about how this plays out in our own lives.
Okay.
You know, you might be grappling with a decision.
Right.
Maybe you're considering a career change or trying to figure out how to contribute to a cause that you care about.
Yeah.
There's that part of you that wants to just weigh all the possibilities.
All the possibilities.
Explore every angle.
Right.
That's that infinity impulse.
At work.
At work. But then there's also that urge, right, to take action.
Yeah.
To make a choice.
To make a move.
To move forward.
Yeah.
And that's rootedness coming through.
It is. It's like that internal debate we all have sometimes.
It is, all the time.
Should I keep thinking about this?
Yeah.
Or is it time to just, like, take the leap?
To take the plunge.
And this poem, I think it gives us a new way to, like, frame that struggle.
It does.
See it not as a weakness, but as a dynamic process.
Right.
That can lead to something really meaningful.
And remember all this semiotic analysis that we've been doing.
Right.
It shows us that meaning itself is fluid. Constantly evolving.
Okay.
Just as the poem ends with this unresolved image of the wrestlers locked in an embrace, the interpretation of their struggle also remains open-ended.
It does. It does.
You know, it invites us to keep wrestling with these ideas, to find our own balance between thought and action, in a way that resonates with our own values and experiences.
So the real challenge the poem poses, I think, isn't about picking a side.
No.
But it's about figuring out how to navigate this tension in a way that works for you.
That works for you, yeah.
And recognizing that interplay between infinity and rootedness, it's a lifelong process.
It is.
And one that can lead to both, like, personal growth and meaningful change in the world.
It's a powerful reminder that even a wrestling match can be a source of profound insight.
It can.
You know, pushing us to examine our own assumptions and grapple with these complex ideas in new and unexpected ways.
I've got to admit, I never thought I would find myself pondering philosophy through the lens of a wrestling match.
Me neither.
But this deep dive has really opened my eyes to the power of symbols and metaphors to illuminate these big questions about, you know, how we live and how we think.
That's the beauty of art, isn't it?
I think it is.
That it can kind of sneak up on you and make you think about things in ways you never anticipated.
It's true.
And this poem, with its, you know, unique blend of philosophy and wrestling, certainly does that.
So to our listener, we leave you with this. Where do you see this tension between infinity and rootedness playing out in your own life?
Right. How do you navigate that dance?
Yeah.
Between thinking and doing, between exploring possibilities and taking those concrete steps?
It's a question worth pondering, and hopefully this deep dive has given you some new tools.
New perspectives.
New perspectives to help you grapple with it.
That's what we hope.
That's what we hope for.
And thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening.